2 decades since a tragic bridge collapse at the opening ceremony of the Maccabiah Games here in Israel. The deadly incident led to prison sentences for several involved in the bridge construction, but the physical and mental wounds are still visible for members of the Australian delegation that plunged into the water and the families of those who never made it to the field again. Mike Wagenheim reports.
Time marches on. 20 years gone by now. It was a frantic scene on July 4th, 1997, as a poorly built temporary bridge across from the Ramat Gan Stadium collapsed, and the Australian delegation making their way to the opening ceremony of the Maccabiah Games plunged into the polluted Yarkon River below. The casualties numbered 67, including, ultimately, 4 fatalities.
At the time, I was standing inside the stadium waiting for the Australian team to come in. And when I came out and saw what had happened, it was something which you couldn't imagine.
2 decades later, the Australian delegation to this year's Maccabiah marched across a newer bridge erected in honor of the fallen and paid tribute to those who didn't make it out. The organizers of Maccabiah say they've taken measures to make sure there's never another tragedy like it, and the Australians have shown a willingness, through all the pain and grief, to remain tied to the competition and Israel.
We are talking about a strong and probably one of the most Zionist communities in the world, in the Jewish world. But I would say, especially due to the strength of Maccabi Australia, they succeeded in a way to lead us to reconciliation with the Australian community.
It seems the Australians and Maccabiah organizers are constantly trying to strike a balance between remembering the past and pivoting toward the present. And there may be no greater example of that than Shelley Jackson, whose father, lawn bowler Warren Zines, was among the 4 fatalities, and whose son, Josh, will compete in this year's Maccabiah.
And he will finish the journey that my father began. Le dor vador, from generation to generation. It was with mixed emotions that I suggested to Josh that he trial for the youth football team, and when I found out that he had qualified, there were many tears shed. Both tears of joy for Josh and tears of sadness for my father.
This year's Aussie contingent is 600 strong, its biggest ever. Even the ones born after 1997 have been taught about the accident, and the message to them is clear. The best way to pay your respects to those who didn't make it to the competition is to play your hearts out once you get there. From Ramat Gan, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Moving on now, and on Trump's